much for joining us, Becky. So today on the podcast we have Becky Holmes, um, the author of best-selling Keanu Reeves is Not in Love with You. And I kind of came across you for the first time when I was at a rather more boring conference, and I won't actually say who the hosts were because I don't want to give it away. However, it was just such a breath of fresh air to hear your stories and your background. So, as I mentioned before we even started, I'm so excited to have you join us today for a bit of a different conversation than what we usually have. So, yeah, if you wouldn't mind giving us a bit of an intro, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so as you said, I wrote Keanu Reeves is Not in Love with You a couple of years ago, and a couple of months ago, book two came out, The Future of Fraud. So that's what I've been doing. I also occasionally write for national press. I pop up in the Times sometimes talking about fraud. And other than that, gosh, what do I do? Just sort
Oh,
of
just that.
just that, yeah. I do a lot of speaking, so kind of conferences and a little bit of training here and there, just as you say, to kind of get on stage and do something a bit different.
And I think what is amazing about your stories is you're not, a traditional I started and grew up in fraud, compliance, or whatever. Your context is very kind of different, I suppose. And then you came into it through a more personal matter of the messages that you received on, I believe it was Instagram. And was it Instagram?
It was Twitter slash X
Oh,
slash
yeah.
Elon Musk's.
Whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think so if you wouldn't mind giving some background on that, that would be great because again, we usually just talk to the classic, started off in risk and compliance, and now I'm a fraud investigator. And there's some really cool and exciting stories, but I just love how you've come to actually publish your work now and where you're at today.
Yeah, so it was the strangest journey into this world. And if somebody had said to me like 6 years ago, oh, you're going to be, doing quite a lot of work in the counter fraud industry, I'd have been like, no, I'm not. And I can't think of anything more boring. But I have now become a fraud nerd. So basically, what happened was it was all during lockdown when I set up my Twitter account. And I didn't set it up for anything to do with fraud. I set it up purely to not have to watch Boris Johnson constantly on the news. I thought, I can communicate with the entire world, have chats with people with similar interests and stuff. But the first thing that happened was within a few days, I had so many really fit soldiers in my inbox. All looking very similar, I have to say. Some with the shirts off, which was appreciated. Thank you very much. But all with kind of like the initial thing was hello, dear. Hello, my queen. Are you married with kids? That was a very sort of quick question. And something that I always say, so anyone that's heard me talk before will think, stop banging on about this. But if it had been one handsome soldier that messaged me, this could be an entirely different situation because I am the sort of person that will talk to anybody and could well have ended up the victim of a romance fraud. Because if it was just one person and you're kind of, as we were in lockdown, maybe a bit isolated, I was living with my mum, so I was kind of a bit frustrated at times. I would very happily have chatted to somebody and maybe got involved. I don't know. But because there were so many, all with the same job, all with the same opening line, it was very obvious that something was amiss. So over the course of the next few months, I just started saying as much nonsense as I could to them to see what I could get away with. And it was really clear that they were just sticking to a script. And I found that really interesting. And I was putting these conversations up on Twitter and people were finding them really funny. But where it got serious is that because of what I was doing, excuse me, victims of romance fraud started messaging me and saying, this is what's happened to me. And they hadn't told anybody. So not many had reported to the police. Hardly any had spoken to friends and family about it. And for me, that's really interesting because that's that sort of why not? That was the thing. And then it all came out about the amount of shame and how misunderstood romance fraud is. So then, given that I was very bored in lockdown and I'm quite nosy, I started researching, and that's how it came about. And now, even though I talk and I write about all sorts of fraud, I think romance fraud is the thing that fascinates me the most, because for me it's the cruelest type of fraud. And the psychology involved in it, you know, the coercive control, I find that very interesting.
Yeah, and I think that I mean there's so many points that we can discuss even just on your kind of context and story there. But we're so privileged that during COVID we kind of felt what some people feel like their whole lives, because maybe they can't necessarily go out and socialize, they don't feel comfortable to, etc. And that kind of isolation, and perhaps where you don't feel confident enough to speak to your friends about what's happening behind closed doors, and that vulnerability point, and the fact that you do not want to talk to your bank about it, and that's the kind of, I guess, primary issue that we're seeing on the side of financial services is, well, how do you capture the data that goes on to then drive kind of um, reviewing and reporting on this and actually identifying it? Because the reality is people don't want to talk to their banks, they don't even want to talk to their friends. So, and I'm sure you've heard countless stories that are similar to that.
Yeah, and one of the things is, so when I talk, when I write, I try my hardest not to use any statistics, because the data that we have on fraud, particularly romance fraud, is absolutely substandard. So and that is nobody's fault. It comes down to this kind of victim shame, etc. But when I see organizations putting out, we've reduced romance fraud by blah blah blah, whatever, I always think no, because you have actually no idea. So the reports that go through action fraud, or report fraud as it is now, I can't even imagine. It must be like a tenth of, or even less, of the number of victims that have actually been affected, because people don't do it. So we're always dealing with inaccurate data, and that's really hard. And I always say to people, even if you don't get a response from report fraud, even if nothing happens, and in the case of romance fraud, unfortunately, the idea of somebody being arrested and you getting your money back is almost laughable. However, it needs to be reported, because I want people who look at that data to see how much more prevalent it is than they've previously thought. And that way, maybe, just maybe, some more resources will go into that particular line.
Yeah, and I think the reporting point is really important, and I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts or ideas for banks and other financials. I'm talking mostly about retail because I think it impacts more on the retail banking than the types of financial services on the professional kind of buy side hedge funds asset manager side. So we are predominantly talking about the banking industry here. But I suppose on that feedback point, I'm even the other day was grabbing a coffee, and I was standing in line next to a lady that was paying in cash, and she was getting a coffee for her granddaughter or something like that, and she said, she was like, oh, you know what, I barely ever try not to use my card because I never know what the transactions relate to because they're so complicated in terms of the wording and the description. She's like, and sometimes the dates don't match, etc. And that'll be because you're tapping, and obviously the banking system takes a while to then process it, which is still crazy to me. And if we were to talk about the kind of blockchain environment and how much it can facilitate those transactions, different conversation. But it was so interesting to me because on the very basic things, we're still not quite getting it right. The fact that someone comes to me in the line at a coffee shop and gives feedback that they would never then think that the banks would listen to. And it's like, how do you actually promote? Because it's almost too easy, right? Like, let's make the transaction description more facilitated to actually understanding what the transaction is about. And that's just a coffee shop £4 transaction. But the thing is, sometimes, and you'll have probably experienced this, the actual perpetrators use the small transactions as test transactions. So you might think, oh, that's only a £4 transaction, doesn't actually matter what it relates to. But maybe it does, because maybe you weren't at that coffee shop on that day. And so, even the basic stuff, banks could get so much more information from almost like the people next door to you. But however, those same people are not probably going to go to the banks and give that feedback and say, this is the ways that you can make my life easier and better. So have you seen like either examples of really good practice in this space, or what you think that we can really invest money in as financial services to actually get people to give us better data and more data?
Yeah, if I'm honest with you, the experiences that victims have shared with me have not been positive. So it's been along the lines of the bank has picked up, is this £200 John Lewis thing? Is this you? Look, make sure you authenticate it on the app, blah, blah, blah. But a 35 grand transaction to Nigeria for the first time ever has gone completely unnoticed. So there's still that discrepancy. And I'd like to be able to say that was pre-COVID, pre all of the work that's gone in, but sometimes it's not. And I still don't understand how things like that aren't being picked up. However, I think a lot of budget and resource and expertise is going into the technological side. So how can we put that friction between fraudster and victim? And that is great. Of course, it's great. You want to be able to do these things where a dodgy transaction comes up and the bank says, hang on, I don't think so. We need that. But when we're looking at retail banks and where they need to be putting money in, I don't think they're listening. They're not listening to what they need to invest in, and that is better customer care. Because customers don't want to go to their banks because the banks are cold and they're unsympathetic and they shut them down and they still victim blame. The language that they use is still old fashioned. Falling for fraud. You don't fall for fraud. Fraud is a crime that happens to you. We don't say fell for a burglary, fell for a mugging. But with fraud, we still use victim blaming language. Oh, you just walked into it. Well, no, I didn't. I had my money stolen. How much money did you lose? No, I didn't lose it. I didn't drop it down the drain. I didn't gamble it. It was stolen. Banks aren't investing in how they speak to their customers, and they're not investing in training frontline customer facing staff to be more emotionally aware. And I know that sounds fluffy, and I know that banks will think, no, it's all about technology. We've got to do this, that, and the other. But when you're looking at emotional crimes, and I'm talking about romance fraud, but I'm also talking about, say, like investment frauds, where somebody has come along and really struck up a friendship with you. So these kind of emotional frauds, you can have all of the technology in place, but if that person has been coerced, controlled, socially engineered, they will
It's the preliminary steps, basically.
Yeah, so it's those bits where they will find a way to pay because they've been controlled, because the fraudster has essentially groomed them.
Yeah.
So there needs to be. So one of the victims that I spoke to in the first book was a lady who, she went into her bank and tried to send a large payment over to, I can't remember whether it was Nigeria or Ghana, but it was one of the two. And the woman behind the counter said, do you know this person? It's the most ridiculous question for a bank to ask. Of course they think they know them. What are they going to say? No.
Yeah.
So this woman said, yes, I do. And the person behind the kiosk said, oh, okay, fine, and ticked that box. That's unacceptable. It's a silly question. So banks need to be thinking about what they ask their customers at the point where the customers want to send a transaction that looks unusual. And they need to be trained to do it in an emotionally aware way. And like I say, any retail banks listening to this might think, oh, what's this hippie on about? But we're talking about very clever, emotionally aware fraudsters who are manipulating people. And the people who are frontline in the banks need to be as good. So they need to be saying, let's have a chat away from here. And maybe not saying, we think this is a scam, but maybe saying, look, we've had quite a few examples recently where it's just like this. And it turns out to be, making it not about that person is being so ridiculous, that person is being scammed. It needs to be about, let's have a think about this together. And I know that that takes resource and budget and training. And, not everybody is going to be great at that. But they need to do something about it because fraudsters are grooming their victims to find ways through this. So,
Yeah. And it's a little bit unfair in some ways, isn't it? In the sense of the legislative framework as it's built, especially the new ACTA legislation, the failure to prevent fraud offence. I think it's great in some ways to have legislative kind of incentive to enhance your processes and procedures internally within organizations. But I feel like when people feel so far away from what's happening, so say your CEO or a board member or director, it's like, how do you actually evidence? They like to see the data, right? And as you say, the data's so poor. So it's almost like, they need data to drive the work, but they need to do the work to get the data. And it's
yeah.
an absolute catch 22. But you mentioned there about, the way that the scammers are quite sophisticated and stuff. But even beyond that, I think what I've, just from listening to your stories, the fact of the matter is they're not only scamming people that we would traditionally view as vulnerable. And I think I've really been taught that vulnerability is quite different than what we traditionally have thought vulnerability to be. Because these are some very smart individuals, and it's not even necessarily that they're, in a bad place. They might actually be in a very good place, which is why they've been targeted as victims. So what have you learned about vulnerability and people's, I guess, human nature or psychology towards scammers, or what we would see as scammers, but if they've maybe been targeted at a time when, either things are really good or really bad, and they're not necessarily your traditional vulnerable person.
So this stereotype, let's talk about romance fraud because it is my love. Well, hang on, that sounds odd. um, so the stereotype of the bored middle-aged woman, lonely, desperate for a man, gullible, vulnerable, we need to discount that. Of course, there is that section of people, the same as there are men who are lonely and whatever. There are people in their 30s who are lonely and whatever. So there are people who are vulnerable in the traditional sense. There are people with learning difficulties, for example, who it turns out are being targeted more and more. There are these vulnerabilities that we are aware of and we count as vulnerabilities, as you rightly say. However, vulnerability, and again, I'm going back to the first book, what I came to realize is you can be vulnerable at a particular moment without being a vulnerable person. And again, just to go off on a slight tangent before I return, this is another thing where reason why people don't want to report to banks. They don't want to be termed a vulnerable person. How
Right,
embarrassing, really
right. Yeah, yeah,
embarrassing.
yeah.
So I've seen marketing materials from banks, are you vulnerable? Have you been vulnerable? No one's going to reply to that. I'm going to go in there and say, hi, I'm a vulnerable person and I've made a mistake. You're not going to do it. but we all have vulnerabilities.
And by the way, I'm not laughing because I think it's funny. I'm laughing because of the reality
Yeah,
of that.
I get you. I mean, God, my first book, it's full of humor and stuff. I'm a big believer in you can laugh at things and not be being derogatory.
Vulnerable people, not going to go into a bank and say I'm a vulnerable
Yes.
person.
So we all have vulnerabilities, but we are not all vulnerable. So there are times throughout everybody's day when everybody has points of vulnerability. So two personal things. First one is last Christmas, I had one of these, excuse me, Amazon messages. You've got a parcel coming, and it was my stepdaughter's Christmas present. And it said on this thing, we can't deliver it before Christmas. And I thought, oh my God, what an absolute nightmare. You know, a 15-year-old not getting what she wants for Christmas. And it said, you know, in order to get this before Christmas, we have to do a surcharge. At the time, I was making my breakfast. I was car keys in one hand, trying to, you know, pull washing out with it. I got this message, and I was in that moment, I was vulnerable because I was busy, and it set me into a slight panic. And I thought, oh, God, it's the last thing I need. So I clicked on the link, and I was just about to start putting card details in. And I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? But that I could have put my card details in there. I think I put the first four in. It wasn't until I thought, what are you doing, Becky? What are you doing? And I stopped it. So that was a definite moment of vulnerability for me. And the second one is when, and I talk about this at conferences, when Russia invaded Ukraine, I saw this post, and it was for a dog sanctuary. People who were fleeing their places were leaving their dogs behind, etc. And I saw this thing, and I saw the pictures, and I sent 500 quid to this thing. And I was annoyed because I was saving up for one of those posh Dysons, but I sent this money. And afterwards, it was nothing to do with a charity. It was just a bloke with no dogs.
Yeah.
But I became vulnerable in that minute because that is my passion in life. Dogs are my passion. So I saw these pictures, and it sent me into this state where logic and reason went out of the window, and I was completely acting on emotion. And even when I'd done it, I didn't think to myself, what have you done? It was only when I went back on to have a look at how this organisation was doing that it turned out it didn't exist. And it was then that I thought,
You were
you are
just about
ridiculous.
to write an email. I hope the dogs are much better off with my
Yeah.
book.
And I was thinking, you should not be doing this line of work. You are like the worst person. But then I also thought, well, no, because it just goes to show that anybody does have vulnerabilities, and it's not just people who are sitting at home alone and people who are widows and, you know, people with some form of learning difficulty. It's not these people who we describe as vulnerable. It's everybody, because everybody has these
I
vulnerabilities.
love that actually. We all have vulnerabilities. We're not all vulnerable people.
Yeah.
I think that is really important. I mean, I've talking about your examples. I remember, and this was probably about 8 years ago, and I've never clicked on anything ever before in my ever since in my life. But I got a message from what I thought was my bank saying something about, and again, it was probably because I wasn't paying attention, and I saw this message, and I must have had a transaction either go out or come in, and I thought, oh, I better do this. And I click on the link, and it says, oh, do your, you know, with the bank you've got the 3 letters of your memorable word or whatever. So I start putting it in, and I click enter, and it says, oh, you've got to do it again. But it kind of looks like my bank, and then I'm like, but usually it says if it's wrong, it will just take you back to redo it. It doesn't say fill in different letters. And I'm going, oh, hold on a minute. And I'd already done 3 of the letters of my memorable word. And if anything, I might have done, I was lucky because I had about 18 letters of my memorable word. So there was a lot of them. It wasn't like they could guess immediately. But I think I might have done it twice before realizing, oh, hold on a minute, this would not happen on my banking app or in my bank. So I called my bank at that time. And I said, are you guys doing something with my account? Because I've just had to do this thing and follow this link. And they said, no, 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 we've not asked you to do that. You need to go change your password because it's a fraudster. And again, I'm like traditionally or classically by a bank, I would not have been classified as a vulnerable person, I don't think at that time. But how funny it is that we almost, and this is again not to be derogatory or whatever, but classically in a vulnerability scenario, um, banks are often, or traditionally we're often told to look out for maybe older age related vulnerabilities. But what about younger people that don't understand about the concept of like fraud or transaction fraud, or even these links, or hey, this is your mum or whatever, I've lost my phone, this is my friend's number, can you like text me on this or I'll call you back or whatever. You must have seen those types of scammers as well. um how about the young people? Where's the education? And I feel like that education isn't happening across the board, but also we're almost kind of avoiding the young people because we assume that they'll be more astute to that, but I don't think
Yeah.
that's the case.
I wrote a full page actually for the Times a few weeks ago about how children and young people are being used for scams. And a lot of it is, well, I say a lot of it, a portion of it is based around gaming. So that the amount of children and young people who are being targeted via online gaming, because you are speaking on a headset or whatever to people that you don't know. Now, if you were talking, so parents, if you went into a bedroom and your kid's on the phone and your mum's like, oh, who's that? Oh, I don't know, just some bloke from the States. Your mum will be like, hang that phone up right now and I'm
Yeah.
confiscating it. But gaming, nobody asks who you're talking to because it's just other people playing the game. But that's how they get in. So different age groups, well, in fact, different genders, sexualities, age groups, cultures, they all have different vulnerabilities. And in terms of age groups at the moment, I think gaming is a big one. I mean, you look at platforms like Roblox and Fortnite, there's millions of users, and granted, a lot of them are in their 30s, but there are a huge amount of kids and young people on there.
Yeah, I've got a friend of mine actually, couple of kids, one of them's 11, the other one's 15 or so. But how many times we've had, a glass of wine in the kitchen and we're just in the middle of conversation, they're playing on Roblox, kid runs in, oh mom, can you give me more money for my Roblox account? And da, da, da. you know and mom's having a nice conversation, mom says, oh yeah, okay then. And you're absolutely right, that gaming world is probably
Yeah.
rife with fraudsters. And
But I mean, even because you'll know better than anybody that it's not just money that fraudsters want now, it's data. And it's so easy to get data from young people, because if you say to a young person, right, your character can get a new skin, I'm so down with the kids, like a new costume, all you need to do is don't worry, I don't need any money from you, but if you click on this survey and fill it in, it's part of a marketing thing we're doing. Suddenly they're clicking on, they're giving loads of data, they're giving addresses, phone numbers, names of parents, all these things,
oh, interesting.
and great. So scammers go off, they can create fake identities or synthetic identities, they can sell data on the dark web so that people can take out loans in their names and stuff. It's not just money that they want anymore. Data is more valuable than a 100 quid Amazon card.
Yeah, that's really scary. Yeah, and I guess, the world is changing so much now with the different types or the abilities of scammers to access information,
Mm,
data, money. And, we couldn't even solve the challenge before when it was much less complicated. Never mind now trying to, and I guess, banks are investing in technology to enable them to do that. But as we've just discussed, is so much broader than technology of actually identifying fraudsters and scammers. I think what fraudsters do is push us to kind of be closer behind them, but we're still behind them.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And the reason being because people will be sick of me saying this, and I mean everybody says the same thing. It's not a view that's something I've come up with, but fraudsters don't have to ask for budget, for management sign off. They don't have to go to a CEO for a idea for a project to do something. They just get on with it. Now we can't do that on the kind of counter fraud side because there's also there's all kind of data protection and all the rest of it, so we can't do it, but they can, and that's why they are always ahead. And to some extent I think we have to accept that. I know that's not a popular view, but we have to accept it and keep up as we can and make things as hard as possible. I don't think there's ever going to be a world with no fraud in. So something I say in the new book is that actually I suspect that there's going to be a resurgence in old school scams. Because we are now putting so much effort, even as individuals, we're putting so much effort into trying to identify AI and to kind of be really careful with our data and to is that a scam? Is that a scam? That I think we're taking our eye off the ball a little bit with real life people, because now there is a thing, and maybe this is an older generation, but I don't know. There is a thing where, oh, thank God it's a human. Now, that's not necessarily any better, but there's such a relief that we're not talking to a robot or a chatbot that we say, oh, thank God it's a human.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, that's just a personal view, but I've kind of heard stories. I've heard more stories recently of the sort of old school con man than I had 5 years ago, which I think is quite interesting. And I think people are now, clever fraudsters are using that mistrust of modern technology. They're using the fact that, God, none of us understand it. I don't understand it. I've got no idea what's going on. The fact that we don't understand that is a vulnerability in itself, and that can be exploited massively.
I wonder what, I guess not solution. I think solution is probably a bit bullish, but I wonder whether, societal or community level discussions within a banking framework would be a really good way to make things work. So practitioners that are working on the ground, but more kind of community spirited rather than we're a bank, we're hosting this event, and you guys come in, you talk about fraud, and then we'll see what we can pick out of that. But is it more community? Should it be more community driven for people to actually understand of all ages where certain themes or trends are coming up? So I think it's easier to both give feedback and also receive in that kind of trusting environment rather than bank organized, bank driven, bank led initiatives. I don't know. Is it a community problem almost?
It is a community problem. One of the issues that there is in the fraud industry is that fraud isn't very sexy. So people don't talk about fraud the way they talk about serial killers and shooting and terrorism. They're all sort of media sexy, massive headline subjects that everybody reads. They're like, oh my God, what is this? And you gobble up that information. Fraud, nah, it's a massive problem, but
Yeah.
nobody cares about it until it's happened to them or
Yeah.
someone they really know. So I really like the idea, for example, of, have you seen that? I haven't actually watched it, but there's a program on now. I think it's called The Assembly, something like that. And a celebrity goes and sits in a room and is asked questions. Nothing is off limits.
Okay.
Now, I haven't seen it, but I would love it if there was a thing where online you've got somebody really senior in the bank. You've got that online and customers can go on and they can ask stuff, proper stuff that customers want to know. Now, that bank person will get a hard time, but
Yeah.
so what? So what?
That's
That's
what
what they should
builds
be doing.
trust.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
person, I mean, I'm saying this as somebody who I ran press offices for like 17 years. So PR wise, I've kind of always got that in my head as well. But how amazing to be that bothered about your customers that you host something whereby you are asked directly. It's not that a marketing email comes out and says, would you like to help us with our feedback, blah, 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 where I don't know how many people answer those, but you know, whatever. But I know for a fact that say the CEO of a UK bank came on and said, right, okay, I'm going to answer a number of questions drawn out of a hat, whoever, you know, whatever. God, I'd tune into that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. But I guess the if you are getting data out of that as a bank, which I'm sure you'd get some really fantastic information, but there's still the challenge of how you then structure unstructured data or information to then make it usable. Or are you just saying, let's just build trust first and we'll get to the data
That's
later?
exactly what I'm saying, because people don't want to provide data if they don't trust the organization that's asking
Got you.
for it.
Yeah.
So again, you know, this will sound fluffy to to banks and all the rest of it, who are all about data and all about the bottom line. But until you've got the trust, and you know, trust in everybody is at an all-time low. We don't trust our state, we
And
don't
we
trust
don't have
organizations.
community. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't trust
Yeah.
each other. So at the moment, we're all kind of floundering around, not knowing who to trust.
Mm.
So that needs to be built in order to get the data. And I know it's a long-term thing, and it means that you're not going to get your data for a year. But my God, a year in the grand scheme of things, if you could get reliable data by doing some really hard, fluffy stuff in the meantime, who cares if it's a year late? Who
Yeah.
cares? It will be accurate.
Yeah, and I wonder whether also we're a little bit overcomplicating the problem by trying to make it like explainable. Like, let's get something that makes sense at the end. And the reality of human psychology is we are complicated. So the more we overcomplicate getting to a solution rather than just talking to people, getting real life information, understanding what people are doing. Because the fraudsters aren't going around getting data, building trust. Well, they're building trust in a different way through
Yeah,
coercive mechanisms, but they're not sitting there at a board meeting saying, how can we do this for like 3 years?
exactly.
Yeah, so I think it's back to your point, it's more of a doing. Let's start somewhere and we'll get somewhere else, in a year, or maybe we'll see trends and patterns we didn't expect. But I do think we often, as large organizations, we almost want like a complete procedure before getting to action. And it's not
But
that
the
easy.
procedure then isn't built on reality.
No, and it
It's
often
built
isn't,
on
which is
what
the
board
problem.
members talk about and what focus groups talk about. And focus groups tend to be people who like going to focus groups. So, we're looking at a really limited sample, and they're not necessarily people who you should be listening to. I mean, let's get some people who've had terrible experiences and can be learned from. Let's. Oh, I don't know. It frustrates me that we're not. What I've noticed is, and this isn't just in financial services, this is every single sector.
Hmm.
Everybody gets together over conference season and everyone's slaps each other on the back. Oh, aren't we doing this great? We're listening to our customers and this, that, and the other. No, you aren't. You are taking some very small data that has been answered by people who have the time to sit and answer your marketing emails. That's who you're listening to. And that is then interpreted by people who sit around a board table. And also, and I don't care what anybody says, and I've seen this in previous lives, it will be shaped to fit in to what can be done. What's the point of that?
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It's almost like the reverse of what you want. You want to understand it, and
Yeah.
then try and fix it. But we're
Yeah.
trying to fix it before
Yeah.
understanding it.
And we're trying to sort of shape the problem around what can be done.
And what we know and what we understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, rather
And
than the
then
full picture.
it's
That's so
passed on to the
interesting.
PR teams. The PR teams go out and say, we've got this brand new amazing thing that will solve problems. No, it won't. It will solve problems for the people who have said it's a problem on your board level.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because what we're training our technology systems based on, so the historical stuff, is not what's going to be happening in the future anyway. And I think that's part of the other technical difficulty, is the fact that will systems actually understand what's happening beyond what they've seen historically? And the landscape is moving so fast and changing so fast that almost all the tech can really do is help you see historical trends and if they match what's happening today, but not necessarily spot outliers of that trend data, because it doesn't know any better, and
Yeah.
neither do we if we're not actually interacting with the customer base. And I guess one of the other things that we've been speaking about in terms of financial crime is the younger practitioners coming into the space, and then yes, okay, you get an alert from the system saying, oh, this might be an anomaly. But if you haven't actually interacted with your customer base and you've just come in fresh and all you know is how to use technology rather than interacting with people on a personal and human level, that's a real fear for me personally as to how do future practitioners actually get up to speed with that human psychology and interaction piece, and understanding people and understanding what's a real anomaly versus a tech-driven anomaly of a tech that understands historical trends. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? What
So
are your fears about the future that are kind of on fears is a bit strong, but what do you think the future of fraud and romance fraud, what does that look like, and what are the main challenges?
I think, well, we can't not talk about AI, can we? I think we're going to have a big issue AI wise. I think particularly in the case of romance fraud, we're going to be looking at more problems with deep fakes, because a lot of the red flags that we used to give people to identify a romance fraud, they don't exist anymore. So you can't look out, in all cases, you can't look out for bad spelling or grammar, or not using the same, clearly not being English as the first language. You can't say, well, if you can't have a phone call with them, they're not real, because you can.
Yeah,
You
or a
can't
video
say,
call even.
or a video call, yeah. Because now, and this is another piece I did for the Times recently, real-time video manipulation is on its way. It exists,
Yeah.
not amazingly, but even that can be,
Oh,
if
bad
you're having,
signal or whatever.
exactly, I'm on the wrong
Yeah.
rig, whatever. So
Yeah.
that's going to be a big issue. The same as it will be an issue in things like these kind of kidnap scams, or the sort of mum, I've lost my phone type thing. That sort of thing, is going to be a big issue in. So AI obviously concerns me. Crypto concerns me, because not that there's this amazing book by a guy called Nick Furneaux, and it's called There's No Such Thing as Crypto Crime. And he's actually spot on, because there isn't crypto crime. It's just that crypto is being used to facilitate other crimes.
Yeah.
So it's being used as a vehicle to get money in different ways. That worries me, particularly over in the States, where they have crypto ATMs, where you can direct somebody to their nearest ATM to put money in. There's nothing regulated about that at all. It's not like you're going into a bank and saying, can you send 30 grand to Cambodia? You're basically going to an ATM and sending it completely, well, you're just sending kind of digital
Directly.
money, yeah, directly. So crypto worries me. Gaming, as I've mentioned, I find that a concern. I find, oh God, social media. So social media, people are trying to hold them more and more to account, and there's kind of cases of late where Meta has been exposed for earning so much out of fraudulent adverts, etc. So it bothers me that social media companies still say, look, we are the host, we're not responsible for the content, we are just the platform, people are free to put on what they want. Well, no. The Online Safety Act in the UK in 2024, was it 2024? Yeah. There's stuff in there about, if there's fraudulent activity, social media companies can be fined millions of pounds. It's not happened yet. And the people who run social media companies could not give a toss about the likes of you or me. They don't care if we lose anything,
And
have anything stolen.
I think social media is one, but the other funny thing that where I wonder whether there's some level of boundary of accountability is phone companies. Because a lot of
Oh,
this stuff is happening on text message, call, and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, what's happening? What are they doing? Or what are they attempting to do? Or is there room for them to do more?
well, this is it. So with the whole PSR thing, banks have to reimburse up to 85 grand, etc. I'm actually not a fan of that. I don't think it's fair. I don't see why banks are having all of that
All of the
responsibility.
liability, yeah.
That is, in my personal view, that is not fair, because it's also telecoms companies, it is social media, it's the way that fraudsters reach us. By the time it gets to the bank, that loads of the work has been done already.
And
So
as you said, the preliminary steps, like on the lead up to the banking
yeah.
transaction itself, yeah.
So I think that this responsibility should be more shared between, as you say, telecoms and social media. And of course, the banks have to take some responsibility if they blatantly miss things. But there should be a shared approach.
Yeah.
At the moment, it just seems like everyone's gone, oh God, that bank let that happen.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that. I think it's unfair.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, in terms of the finisher, is there anything? Obviously, you've mentioned, banks should do more to gain trust of customers, especially in an AI world where so much of the communication between banks, you don't actually see the people behind those processes. You speak to bots or you speak to chat systems, etc. So, I think that's a really good way that banks could build trust. Is there anything else that you kind of give, or people should perhaps read your books to discover more about what your views are on, what could we do better in either financial services, social media, telecoms, etc.?
Such a big question, isn't it?
And maybe we
Um,
should have started on that.
yeah.
Just
Um,
one, just focus on one key takeaway then.
I mean, I'm going to overlap with what you just said and what I've sort of been saying all along, which is that you aren't going to get accurate data if you're just generating it from marketing emails, from sort of the occasional outreach, and from people who work within the bank, and then fitting it round what your board members think is appropriate. And I sort of feel like saying, oh God, I know that nobody has any money. Of course they don't. Well, even sort of big organisation, well, actually forget that, social media's got loads of money, but most other organisations, it's all a bit tight at the moment, budgets and stuff. But get some external people in. Stop talking to just people within the fraud team who are incredibly talented and know everything there is to know about the internal workings of the bank. But get other people in. Get people in who are around this. There are some amazing people out there, even people who do similar things to me with speaking. There's ethical hackers, people like that. Get people in to say and to have some enthusiasm and some passion and not just speak in banking language, and to explain to people who work with customers why language is important and why you shouldn't just use banking language. Nobody wants to hear initialisms and acronyms. We're all sick of them. No one understands them. Do something different.
Yeah. And I think my two, if I may have two, my two biggest takeaways from our conversation is we need to do more around young people and training. And we all have vulnerabilities, but we're not all vulnerable people. Those are my two main takeaways. So thank you ever so much for having the conversation today. As I say, I was full of enthusiasm for it, and it's great to have you on. So thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you for having me.